In an HOA neighborhood, 89 likes on a community post can turn you into public enemy number one. I only posted some yard cleanup photos. Who would have thought that Paula Hensley would see that as a declaration of war? Every Tuesday morning at exactly 7:30, her gray SUV would accidentally ram into my trash bins. The first time I thought it was an accident. The second time it seemed weird. By the 10th time, I finally understood. She needed content for her online community group. Until I decided to give Paula a real reason to hit the brakes. Comment below and tell me where you're watching from. I need to know if anyone else is living in HOA hell like I was. My name is Dean Carter, and 8 months ago I thought moving to Meadowbrook Estates would be the start of a peaceful new chapter. I'm a 32-year-old software engineer who works from home, and this upscale neighborhood in the outskirts of Austin seemed perfect. Manicured lawns, friendly neighbors, and strict community standards that I actually appreciated. What I didn't expect was that my innocent enthusiasm for home improvement would trigger a 6-month war with the most vindictive woman I've ever encountered. It all started with what should have been a harmless post in our neighborhood's online community group. I had spent the entire weekend cleaning up the previous owner's neglected landscaping, and I was genuinely excited to share the transformation. The before photo showed overgrown bushes, dead grass, and general chaos. The after photo displayed neat hedges, fresh mulch, and a lawn that finally looked like it belonged in Meadowbrook Estates. I wrote a simple caption, "Finally settled in, loving the neighborhood." Within 2 hours, that post had exploded to 89 likes and 23 positive comments. Neighbors I hadn't even met were welcoming me, offering gardening tips and praising my work ethic. Mrs. Rodriguez from 3 houses down invited me to a barbecue. The Thompson family offered to lend me their leaf blower anytime. For the first time since moving here, I felt like I truly belonged. What I didn't realize was that across the street, Paula Hensley was watching those like counts climb with growing fury. Paula had been the self-appointed queen of our community group for 3 years, posting daily reminders about trash bin placement, holiday decoration guidelines, and proper lawn maintenance techniques. Her weekly community standards reminder post typically received 4 to 8 likes from the same loyal followers. My casual yard transformation post had just received more engagement in one afternoon than she'd gotten in the past 6 months combined. Paula Hensley was 38 years old and served as our neighborhood's compliance officer, a position she took very seriously. She lived alone in the largest house on Maple Street after her divorce 2 years prior, and she seemed to channel all her energy into maintaining what she called community excellence. Her gray Ford Explorer was always perfectly clean, though her driving skills left much to be desired. She was the admin of our online community group and posted almost daily about various neighborhood issues, always with the same passive-aggressive tone that made everyone uncomfortable. Frank Whitman, my 58-year-old neighbor to the right, had warned me about Paula during our first conversation over the fence. He was a retired accountant with a dry sense of humor and an impressive security camera system that covered most of his property. That woman has been trying to be the neighborhood celebrity for years, he told me while sipping his morning coffee. She posts about every little thing, hoping someone will pay attention. You just got more likes in one day than she's gotten all year. The first crash happened on a Tuesday morning, exactly 1 week after my viral post. I was in my kitchen making coffee when I heard the unmistakable sound of metal hitting plastic, followed by the crash of garbage scattering across the street. I rushed outside to find my trash bin knocked over with garbage strewn everywhere, and Paula's SUV stopped about 20 feet away. She rolled down her window and called out, "Sorry about that, maybe next time place it further from the street." I jogged over to apologize, thinking I had somehow positioned the bin incorrectly. "No problem at all," I said, already starting to clean up the mess. "I'll be more careful about placement." Paula's response was cold and dismissive. "Just read the HOA handbook about proper procedures." As I picked up scattered papers and coffee grounds, I noticed Paula hadn't gotten out to help, but she was definitely watching me intently. Frank appeared at his window with his coffee mug, shaking his head slowly. When I finished cleaning up and went back inside, I checked the HOA guidelines thoroughly. My bin had been placed exactly 18 inches from the curb, precisely as required. The second crash happened 3 days later, and this time I was watching from my living room window. Paula's SUV came down Maple Street at exactly 7:30 in the morning, just like before. Instead of staying in the center of the lane, she deliberately swerved toward the curb and struck my trash bin with enough force to send it rolling 15 feet down the street. This time, I was certain it wasn't an accident. As I walked outside to assess the damage, Paula was already taking photos of the scattered garbage with her phone. She looked up and saw me approaching, and I swear I caught her smiling before she quickly composed her expression into one of concerned disappointment. "This is really becoming a problem," she said, continuing to document the scene. "The placement of these bins is creating a safety hazard for morning commute." I stood there in my pajamas, holding a coffee mug, watching this woman photograph the mess she had just created. "I'm pretty sure the placement is correct," I replied carefully, "but I'll double-check the guidelines again." That afternoon, Paula posted in our community group with photos of my scattered garbage. The caption read, "Another morning, another mess on Maple Street. Some neighbors need reminders about responsibility and proper trash management. Let's all work together to maintain our community standards." The post received 15 likes and several comments expressing concern about irresponsible neighbors. I realized with growing horror that Paula was literally farming content from my misery, turning her deliberate destruction of my property into social media validation. Frank confirmed my suspicions that evening when he knocked on my door with printed screenshots from his security camera. "Son," he said, handing me the evidence, "Paula used to get maybe 10 likes on her community reminder posts. Your yard post got 89 likes on day one. She's been the self-proclaimed neighborhood influencer for years, and you just showed up and stole her thunder without even trying." The third crash happened exactly 1 week later, and by then I was ready with my phone camera. Paula's approach was becoming predictable. She would drive slowly down Maple Street, scanning for my trash bin, then accelerate slightly just before impact. This time she hit the bin so hard that it bounced off a parked car and came to rest upside down in Mrs. Rodriguez's flower bed. The garbage explosion was spectacular, with coffee grounds and food scraps creating an abstract art installation across 3 properties. Paula immediately got out of her SUV with her phone, walking around the scene like a crime investigator, photographing every angle of the destruction. When she finally looked up and saw me filming from my front steps, she waved cheerfully and called out, "Looks like we need to discuss proper bin placement at the next HOA meeting." Frank joined me at the fence as we watched Paula continue her photography session. "She's been at this for 20 minutes, he observed, gesturing toward Paula with his coffee mug. "Look at her, she's posing next to your garbage like it's evidence of some major crime." He was right. Paula was crouching next to scattered banana peels and empty yogurt containers, taking selfies that showed her concerned expression alongside the mess. The most surreal moment came when she started live streaming from the scene, holding up a banana peel while speaking directly to her camera. "Live from Maple Street, where community neglect meets banana peels." Frank nearly choked on his coffee. "Frank," I said, still filming, "please tell me your security cameras caught all of this." His grin was worth 1,000 words. "Son, I've got 4 different angles of that woman deliberately ramming your bin. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" 2 days later, Paula escalated to what she called a comprehensive safety assessment of my property. I discovered this when I returned from work to find her standing in my driveway, wearing safety glasses, an orange reflective vest, and carrying an official-looking clipboard. She had positioned orange traffic cones around my trash bin area and erected a handmade sign that read, "Hazard Zone Safety. Inspection in progress." The setup looked like a legitimate municipal operation, complete with measuring equipment and soil testing materials. Paula was live streaming the entire inspection, speaking in an authoritative tone about recurring safety violations. "What exactly are you doing in my driveway?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level. Paula adjusted her safety glasses and consulted her clipboard with theatrical seriousness. "Safety evaluation. This location has multiple incidents, indicating systemic problems, requiring documentation." She gestured toward my trash bin with the authority of someone conducting a federal investigation. Frank appeared at his window and called out, "If she starts testing air quality next, I'm calling the EPA." Paula ignored him and continued her performance, taking photographs of my perfectly normal trash bin from every conceivable angle. The situation took an unexpected turn when 8-year-old Tommy Chin came running across the yards, chasing his escaped soccer ball directly into Paula's hazard zone. The boy stopped short when he saw the traffic cones and official-looking setup, clearly confused about whether he was allowed to retrieve his ball. Paula immediately swung her camera toward Tommy, apparently seeing an opportunity to demonstrate the real dangers of my improper trash management. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. Children are being exposed to unsafe conditions." Tommy looked terrified as Paula approached him with her camera. Mrs. Chen appeared moments later, having noticed her son's distress. "Tommy, come here right now," she called firmly. then turned to Paula with an expression I'd never seen before. "What are you doing with that camera? Why are you filming my child?" Paula's response revealed just how far removed from reality her campaign had become, documenting safety hazards that put children at risk. "This violation zone represents clear danger to neighborhood youth." Mrs. Chen's voice turned ice cold as she stepped between Paula and Tommy. "The only danger I see here is an adult with a camera harassing children. Delete that footage immediately." Frank's commentary from his window provided the perfect soundtrack. A wild Karen in her natural habitat, Paula's live stream had grown to exactly 7 viewers, all posting confused questions. The whole scene collapsed when Gary Monroe appeared, walking his dog and clearly wondering why there was a woman in a safety vest conducting what appeared to be a municipal inspection in my driveway. "Paula," he said carefully, "do you have permits for this inspection? Because if you're representing yourself as a city official, that could be a problem." The word permits seemed to deflate Paula's entire performance, and she began packing up her equipment while muttering about uncooperative residents. That evening, I sat down with all the evidence I had collected: videos of deliberate crashes, screenshots of Paula's increasingly unhinged social media posts, and Frank's security camera footage that clearly showed the intentional nature of each collision. The pattern was undeniable, and Paula's motivation was becoming clearer with each performance. She wasn't just trying to humiliate me. She was using my misery to rebuild her social media presence and reclaim her position as the neighborhood's most influential voice. Frank knocked on my door around 8 o'clock that evening with a bottle of beer and a proposal. "Dean," he said, settling into a patio chair, "Paula thinks she's playing chess while you're playing checkers. But here's the thing. She doesn't realize you're actually a software engineer who knows exactly how social media algorithms work." He was right. Paula wanted content? Fine. I would give her content, just not the kind she was expecting. Monday evening, I set up my strategy. Every bin she destroys, I would embarrass her twice as hard. Paula had taught me an important lesson about community dynamics. People pay attention to conflict, and whoever controls the narrative controls the conversation. She had spent 6 weeks building a story about my incompetence, but she had made one critical error. She had documented her own crimes while thinking she was documenting mine. Frank's security cameras had captured every deliberate collision from multiple angles, creating an evidence library that would make any prosecutor jealous. But more importantly, I had learned how to play Paula's own game better than she did. As a software engineer, I understood engagement algorithms, optimal posting times, and how to create content that naturally attracted attention without appearing desperate or manufactured. The 7th crash happened right on schedule Tuesday morning, but this time I was ready, with professional preparation. I had positioned my own camera system to capture the event from 3 different angles, including one that clearly showed Paula's facial expressions during the deliberate collision. She executed her usual routine: slow approach, visual scan for optimal impact angle, slight acceleration, crash, immediate phone documentation. This time, however, she had unknowingly performed for an audience that included not just Frank and me, but also Mrs. Thompson from across the street, who had become suspicious after noticing the weekly pattern. Paula spent her usual 20 minutes photographing the scattered garbage and live streaming her concerned citizen report, completely unaware that her performance was being recorded by multiple witnesses. That evening, I created my first counter content. Instead of directly accusing Paula of anything, I posted a video compilation titled Tuesday Morning Commute Challenges. The video showed a montage of Paula's questionable parking skills around the neighborhood, her crooked attempts to parallel park outside the coffee shop, her habit of taking up 2 spaces at the grocery store, and her tendency to block fire hydrants during her photography sessions. I set it to upbeat music and kept the tone light and humorous, never mentioning trash bins or crashes. The video was simply observational comedy about parking challenges that many suburban drivers face. Within 6 hours, the post had received 47 likes and 12 comments, most of them laughing about their own parking struggles and sharing similar observations about neighborhood driving habits. Paula's response was swift and furious. The next morning, she posted a defensive message about harassment and invasion of privacy, claiming that certain neighbors were targeting longtime residents with malicious surveillance. The post felt desperate and angry compared to my lighthearted parking video, and the community response reflected that difference. Her defensive post received only 8 likes and 2 supportive comments from Carol Jenkins. The contrast was becoming obvious to everyone. My content felt natural and community-fecrid, while Paula's posts were increasingly negative and self-centered. Frank observed the social media dynamics from his unique position as neighborhood watch coordinator. "She's playing defense now," he noted, over our morning coffee ritual. "For 3 months, she controlled the narrative about you. Now you've shifted the conversation to her behavior, and she doesn't know how to respond without looking petty." My second strategic move was launching a positive neighbor spotlight series. Instead of focusing on problems and violations, I started featuring different residents and their contributions to the community. I highlighted Mrs. Rodriguez's beautiful garden, showcased the Thompson family's creative holiday decorations, and celebrated Frank's volunteer work organizing the Neighborhood Watch program. Each spotlight post received 25 to 40 likes and enthusiastic comments from neighbors who appreciated being recognized for their positive contributions. The series created a stark contrast to Paula's constant criticism and complaints, positioning me as someone who focused on community building rather than community policing. Paula tried to compete by posting her own community excellence examples, but her attempts felt forced and received minimal engagement. The 8th crash marked Paula's escalation into pure desperation. She brought extra garbage bags to scatter around my bin, creating a more dramatic mess for her photography session. She also invited Carol Jenkins to witness the aftermath, apparently hoping that additional testimony would strengthen her narrative about my supposed irresponsibility. However, her enhanced performance backfired when Mrs. Thompson, who had been quietly documenting the weekly pattern, approached Carol during the cleanup and showed her Frank's security footage on her phone. Carol's expression changed dramatically as she watched clear evidence of Paula's deliberate collisions, and she quietly left the scene without participating in the usual supportive commentary. By evening, Carol had stopped liking Paula's posts entirely, leaving Paula with almost no community support for her ongoing campaign. My third strategic response was posting before and after cleanup photos with timestamps that subtly documented the pattern without directly accusing Paula. The posts showed the pristine condition of my properly placed trash bin at 6 in the morning, followed by photos of the destruction at 8 in the morning, followed by photos of my cleanup efforts by 9 in the morning. I never mentioned Paula's name or directly accused anyone of anything, but the timestamp evidence created an obvious pattern that observant neighbors began to notice. Comments on these posts gradually shifted from sympathy about my bad luck with bin placement to questions about why these incidents always seemed to happen at the same time, on the same days. The community was starting to piece together the truth without me having to explicitly spell it out for them. Frank summarized the strategic shift perfectly during our evening debrief. "Paula spent 6 weeks building a story about your incompetence, but you spent 2 weeks letting her behavior speak for itself. She's gone from victim advocate to primary suspect without anyone having to directly accuse her of anything." He was right. Paula's latest community standards post had received only 4 likes, while my positive neighbor feature had generated 52 likes and requests for more spotlight content. The tide was turning, but Paula wasn't ready to give up. In fact, her next move would be so desperate and obvious that it would finally expose her true character to the entire neighborhood. As Frank and I watched Paula storm into her house after another failed attempt to generate sympathy for her manufactured crisis, I realized she was about to make the mistake I had been waiting for. Desperate people make desperate choices, and Paula Hensley was about to go nuclear. Paula's nuclear option came in the form of a community safety committee that she announced without consulting anyone, including Gary Monroe, our actual HOA president. The committee consisted of Paula and Carol Jenkins, though Carol seemed increasingly uncomfortable with her role as Paula's only remaining supporter. Their first official act was conducting what Paula called a comprehensive safety inspection of my property, during which they took 47 photos of imaginary violations, ranging from improper mailbox positioning to potential pedestrian hazards created by decorative garden stones. The inspection was performed while I was at work, and I only discovered it when neighbors began texting me photos of Paula and Carol measuring various aspects of my front yard with official-looking clipboards and measuring tapes. What made this inspection different from Paula's previous solo performances was the addition of what she called scientific methodology. Paula had apparently watched several episodes of crime scene investigation shows and decided to apply forensic techniques to my landscaping. She and Carol arrived with evidence bags, latex gloves, soil testing equipment, measuring devices, live stream setup, and pH testing materials. Frank watched the entire operation from his window, later describing it as watching 2 people cosplay as municipal inspectors while actually stalking their neighbor. The inspection lasted 3 hours and included documentation of my garden sprinkler heads, measurements of my walkway width, and soil sample collection from areas where my trash bin was normally placed. The 6th, 7th, and 8th crashes happened within a single week as Paula became increasingly reckless in her desperation to maintain relevance. During the 7th crash, she hit my bin so hard that it bounced off my car and left a small dent in the rear bumper. The impact was loud enough to wake half the neighborhood, and several residents came outside to investigate the commotion. Paula's explanation, that she had swerved to avoid a poorly placed obstruction, fell flat when multiple witnesses pointed out that my trash bin had been positioned in exactly the same spot for months. Frank's security footage clearly showed Paula accelerating toward the bin rather than attempting to avoid it, and she immediately began photographing the damage to my car as if it were additional evidence of my supposed violations. What escalated the situation beyond simple property damage was Paula's decision to involve emergency services in her documentation process. After the 8th crash, she called 911 to report what she described as a recurring traffic hazard, creating ongoing public safety risks. The dispatcher sent Officer Martinez to investigate what Paula had reported as a systematic obstruction of public roadways. Officer Martinez arrived to find Paula with her full documentation setup: traffic cones, measuring equipment, evidence bags, and her drone hovering overhead filming the scene. When he asked Paula to explain the emergency, she launched into a 20-minute presentation about traffic pattern disruption and systematic safety violations, while gesturing toward my overturned trash bin. Officer Martinez's response was professional but pointed. "Ma'am, I understand you have concerns about trash placement, but this is a civil matter between neighbors, not a police emergency. Unless someone is in immediate danger, 911 isn't the appropriate resource for HOA disputes." Paula's insistence that she was documenting patterns of reckless prompted Officer Martinez to review Frank's security footage, which clearly showed Paula's vehicle deliberately striking stationary objects. The conversation that followed was uncomfortable for everyone except Frank, who provided coffee and commentary from his porch while watching Paula try to explain why her own driving behavior wasn't the real safety concern. Officer Martinez left with Paula's information and a warning about misusing emergency services. My 4th strategic response was documenting Paula's double parking incident outside Starbucks while she was inside ordering coffee. The video showed her SUV blocking 2 parking spaces and partially obstructing the fire lane while she spent 15 minutes inside, apparently unaware of the traffic problems she was creating. I posted the video with a gentle caption: "Community leaders leading by example. We all have our challenging parking moments." The video struck a chord with neighbors who had experienced similar frustrations with Paula's inconsiderate parking habits, and it was shared over 200 times within 24 hours. The comments section filled with stories about Paula's previous parking violations, creating a public catalog of her selfish behavior that extended far beyond our trash bin conflict. The response to the parking video triggered Paula's most spectacular public meltdown yet. She appeared at my front door at 7 in the morning, still in her pajamas and bathrobe, demanding that I remove the video and apologize for harassment and cyberbullying. When I explained that public parking behavior filmed from public property wasn't harassment, Paula's voice escalated to shouting that could be heard 3 houses away. "You're deliberately trying to destroy my reputation in this community," she screamed, while apparently unaware that her own behavior was accomplishing that goal more effectively than anything I could post online. Mrs. Rodriguez called the police from her kitchen window, not because Paula was threatening me, but because the shouting was disrupting the morning school bus routine and frightening children waiting at nearby stops. The meltdown continued for 20 minutes and was recorded by at least 4 neighbors, including Mrs. Thompson, who had started documenting Paula's behavior after witnessing the safety fair fiasco. Paula's tirade revealed the depth of her delusion about community dynamics and her own role in the escalating conflict. "I've been protecting this neighborhood's standards for 3 years, she shouted. "I've maintained property values and community excellence, while people like you move in and destroy everything we've built." The recordings of Paula's meltdown were shared privately among neighbors, creating a clear picture of someone who had completely lost perspective on appropriate community behavior. The 9th crash was Paula's biggest mistake yet. In her fury over the parking video and community response, she completely abandoned any pretense of the collisions being accidental. She accelerated toward my trash bin with obvious intent, struck it with enough force to send garbage flying across 3 front yards, and then immediately began her documentation routine as if nothing unusual had happened. However, this time her performance was witnessed by Gary Monroe, who had been walking his dog and saw the entire incident unfold. Gary approached Paula during her photography session and quietly asked if everything was all right, noting that he had observed what appeared to be a deliberate collision. Paula's flustered response and inability to provide a coherent explanation convinced Gary that something was seriously wrong with the situation on Maple Street, prompting him to call an emergency meeting to address what he diplomatically described as concerning patterns of behavior affecting community harmony. The emergency neighborhood meeting that Gary Monroe organized for Thursday evening marked the beginning of the end for Paula's campaign of harassment. What started as a small gathering to address community concerns evolved into something resembling a town hall intervention, with 27 households attending the meeting held in the Thompson family's backyard. Frank had prepared a comprehensive presentation using his security footage, showing 6 weeks of deliberate collisions with clear timestamps and multiple camera angles. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Paula had been systematically destroying my property while falsely accusing me of violations, then using the destruction as content for her social media campaigns. The meeting lasted 3 hours, with neighbor after neighbor sharing their own experiences of Paula's bullying behavior, harassment, and attempts to control community conversations through intimidation and manufactured drama. The most damaging testimony came from unexpected sources. Mrs. Park revealed that Paula had been secretly photographing her teenage daughter's friends during pool parties, claiming she was documenting noise violations, but actually creating an archive of images featuring minors without parental consent. The Martinez family shared emails showing Paula's attempts to pressure them into filing false complaints about other neighbors' holiday decorations, lawn maintenance, and pet behavior. Even Carol Jenkins, Paula's former ally, stood up to apologize for her role in supporting what she now realized was a systematic campaign of harassment, rather than legitimate community advocacy. "I thought Paula was protecting our property values," Carol admitted, "but she was actually driving good people away from our neighborhood through bullying and intimidation." Gary Monroe presented statistics that shocked everyone in attendance. 4 families had moved away from Meadowbrook Estates in the past year specifically to escape Paula's harassment, while 6 others had contacted him privately about considering relocation due to the hostile environment she had created. The Nguyen family, who had moved away 3 months earlier, had actually provided written testimony describing how Paula's daily criticism and surveillance had made their children afraid to play in their own yard. Property values weren't being protected by Paula's enforcement activities, they were being damaged by her reputation for creating neighborhood conflict that made potential buyers choose other communities. The realization that Paula's behavior was actually harming the communities she claimed to protect fundamentally changed how residents viewed her ongoing campaigns. The 10th and 11th crashes happened during the week following the community meeting, as Paula realized she was losing control of the narrative and community support. Her social media posts became increasingly desperate and unhinged, with accusations of conspiracy and claims that she was being persecuted for trying to maintain standards. The posts received minimal engagement, with even her most loyal supporters reducing their involvement to occasional emoji reactions. Paula's isolation was becoming visible in her behavior. She stopped participating in neighborhood activities, avoided making eye contact with other residents, and seemed to spend most of her time either creating social media content or watching her neighbors from her windows. What transformed the community response from passive observation to active intervention was Paula's decision to escalate her harassment beyond property damage to personal attacks. She began posting what she called community safety profiles that featured photographs of residents engaged in normal activities, along with commentary about their supposed risk factors and compliance concerns. My profile included photos of me taking out trash, checking my mail, and working in my garden, accompanied by analysis of my behavioral patterns and potential motivations for resisting community standards. The profiles felt invasive and threatening, like surveillance reports rather than community advocacy, and they prompted several neighbors to contact both Gary Monroe and local police about potential stalking behavior. The community's tolerance for Paula's behavior finally reached its breaking point when she published a safety profile featuring the Johnson family's 8-year-old son Tommy, including photos of him playing in his own yard and walking to the school bus stop. The profile discussed Tommy's unsupervised activities and suggested that his parents were failing to maintain adequate supervision in a high-risk environment. Mrs. Johnson's response was immediate and furious. She filed formal complaints with both the HOA and the police, demanding that Paula remove all content featuring her minor child and cease any further surveillance or photography of her family. The incident prompted an emergency conference call between Gary Monroe, the HOA legal advisor, and several affected families to discuss potential legal action against Paula for harassment, cyberstalking, and invasion of privacy. My fifth strategic move was organizing weekly community appreciation events that gave neighbors positive reasons to interact and collaborate. We started with simple activities like group dog walks, shared gardening projects, and outdoor movie nights for families with children. Each event was documented with photos and videos that showed genuine community engagement and friendship, creating a social media presence that celebrated what was working well in our neighborhood rather than constantly criticizing what wasn't. The contrast with Paula's negative content became increasingly obvious, and residents began using our positive event hashtags instead of engaging with Paula's complaint posts. The shift in community conversation was dramatic. Instead of discussing violations and problems, neighbors were sharing success stories, collaboration opportunities, and expressions of gratitude for living in such a supportive environment. The 12th crash was Paula's most desperate attempt yet to regain attention and control. She not only destroyed my trash bin, but also, accidentally, knocked over my mailbox and damaged Mrs. Rodriguez's garden border in the process. The destruction was so extensive that it looked more like vandalism than any conceivable accident, and Paula's attempts to document it as a traffic safety issue were completely unconvincing. Multiple neighbors called the non-emergency police line to report what appeared to be a hit-and-run incident, and Officer Martinez arrived within 30 minutes to investigate the scene. Paula's explanation of the incident was inconsistent and defensive, while Frank's security footage provided clear evidence of intentional destruction of property. Officer Martinez issued Paula a citation for reckless driving and property damage, making the situation officially a legal matter rather than just a neighborhood dispute. The police citation was the turning point that finally convinced the remaining neutral neighbors that Paula's behavior was genuinely problematic, rather than simply overzealous community advocacy. Gary Monroe announced that the HOA board would be reviewing Paula's position as compliance officer, and several residents began circulating a petition requesting her immediate removal from any official neighborhood roles. The petition gained 43 signatures within 24 hours, representing over 70% of households in our section of Meadowbrook Estates. The official moving truck arrived at Paula's house on a Wednesday morning, 3 weeks after the community meeting that had effectively ended her reign as neighborhood enforcer. She had spent those 3 weeks alternating between bitter social media posts about toxic neighbors and desperate attempts to rebuild her reputation through increasingly transparent gestures of fake community spirit. Her posts about the moving truck framed her departure as a principled decision to find a community that values proper standards, though everyone knew she was being forced out by social pressure and official consequences. Gary Monroe had formally removed her from all HOA positions, and the police citation for property damage remained on her record as a permanent reminder of her destructive behavior. Paula's last week in the neighborhood was marked by increasingly erratic behavior and final desperate attempts to salvage her reputation. She organized what she called a community standards summit that nobody attended except Carol Jenkins, who spent most of the event apologizing for her previous support of Paula's campaigns. She offered to host a reconciliation barbecue that was ignored by every neighbor except Mrs. Shen, who briefly stopped by to wish Paula well in her future endeavors. Most telling of all, she attempted to organize a neighborhood watch expansion program that was immediately rejected by Frank, who pointed out that Paula's own behavior had been the primary safety concern for the past 6 months. Her isolation was complete and undeniable, making her departure feel more like an inevitable conclusion than a surprising development. And the 21st crash was Paula's final desperate attempt to create drama and maintain relevance during her last week in the neighborhood. She executed the collision with extra force and theatrical flair, apparently hoping to generate one last viral moment for her social media presence. However, the crash backfired spectacularly when it occurred during the morning school bus pickup, creating a traffic delay that inconvenienced 15 families and prompted angry complaints to the city about reckless driving in school zones. Paula's attempt to frame the incident as a final example of my irresponsible bin placement was completely undermined by the timing and context, making her look like someone who prioritized personal vendettas over child safety. The incident was reported to both the police and the school district, adding official complaints to Paula's growing record of disruptive behavior. Frank and I positioned ourselves strategically on his front porch Wednesday morning, both with phones ready to document whatever final drama Paula might attempt to create. We had learned over 6 months that Paula couldn't resist making scenes, especially when she felt like she had nothing left to lose. The moving crew consisted of 3 patient professionals who clearly wanted to complete their job efficiently and get away from whatever neighborhood dispute had necessitated this mid-lease relocation. Paula spent the morning directing the movers with an imperious attitude that made them exchange glances and work as quickly as possible, while simultaneously attempting to live-stream commentary about her forced exile from a community that doesn't appreciate dedicated leadership. Gary Monroe walked his dog past Paula's house twice during the morning, ostensibly for exercise, but obviously monitoring the situation for any potential problems that might require official intervention. Frank provided running commentary from his porch while we watched Paula's increasingly frantic attempts to control both the moving process and her social media narrative simultaneously. The entire neighborhood was quietly witnessing the end of an era, though nobody wanted to seem like they were celebrating someone's misfortune. Paula's final social media attempt was a live-streamed farewell message delivered while standing next to the moving truck. She spoke briefly about toxic community dynamics before realizing only 3 viewers were watching. The live stream ended abruptly when she noticed Frank and me recording her performance from across the street. As the moving crew finished loading the truck and prepared for departure, Paula climbed into her SUV for what she clearly intended to be a dignified exit from a community that had failed to appreciate her contributions. She had spent 20 minutes positioning herself for the perfect departure angle, checking her mirrors repeatedly, and apparently planning some kind of dramatic final statement. Frank and I had our phones ready, along with several other neighbors who had learned over 6 months that Paula's most spectacular failures usually happened when she was trying hardest to look competent and in control. The moving truck was already pulling away from the curb, leaving Paula alone in her driveway for one final moment of neighborhood drama. The setup for Paula's final humiliation was perfect in its simplicity. The moving truck was parked directly in front of her house, requiring careful maneuvering to back out of the narrow driveway without hitting her mailbox, the fire hydrant, or any of the cars parked along Maple Street. Paula had always been a terrible driver with poor spatial awareness, and the stress of moving day was clearly affecting her judgment and coordination. She had been arguing with the moving crew about furniture placement, checking her phone constantly for social media engagement that wasn't materializing, and generally creating chaos around what should have been a straightforward process. As she put her SUV in reverse and began backing toward the street, Frank whispered, "Here we go, watch the mailbox." And that's when karma finally delivered the perfect ending to Paula Hensley's reign of terror. The 22nd and final crash was a masterpiece of poetic justice that unfolded in slow motion while being recorded by at least 6 different neighbors. Paula had spent 10 minutes positioning her SUV for what she clearly intended to be a graceful and dignified departure that would demonstrate her superior driving skills one last time. She checked her mirrors repeatedly, adjusted her seat position, and even took a moment to apply lipstick while glaring at the neighbors who had gathered to witness her exit. The irony was perfect. After 6 months of deliberately crashing into my property, Paula was about to experience her most spectacular collision yet. And this time she would be destroying her own belongings while providing entertainment for the entire community that had rejected her leadership. Frank had predicted exactly what would happen based on 6 months of observing Paula's terrible spatial awareness and tendency to make poor decisions when she was emotional. "She's going to back straight into her own mailbox," he whispered as we watched Paula reverse out of her driveway. "She's so focused on making a dramatic exit that she's not paying attention to where she's actually going." He was absolutely right. Paula's SUV moved steadily backward while she stared straight ahead with an expression of wounded dignity, completely ignoring the large decorative mailbox that she had positioned directly in her path. The collision was inevitable and spectacular. Her rear bumper struck the mailbox post with enough force to knock the entire structure over, sending mail scattering across her front lawn, while her SUV's backup sensors beeped frantically in protest. The impact was loud enough to be heard 3 houses away, and the destruction was immediately obvious to everyone watching. Paula's perfect mailbox, which she had frequently cited as an example of proper community standards, was completely destroyed and lying sideways across her driveway. Her SUV had sustained visible damage to the rear bumper and license plate area, while scattered mail and mailbox debris created a mess that was remarkably similar to the trash bin disasters she had been creating for months. The symbolism was perfect. Paula had finally managed to destroy property and create a public mess, but this time she was both the perpetrator and the victim of her own reckless behavior. Frank and I exchanged glances as we realized we were witnessing the most satisfying example of instant karma either of us had ever seen. Paula's reaction to destroying her own property was even more entertaining than the destruction itself. She sat in her SUV for nearly 30 seconds, apparently trying to process what had just happened, before slowly getting out to survey the damage. Her expressions cycled through confusion, disbelief, anger, and finally humiliation as she realized that multiple neighbors had witnessed and recorded her spectacular failure. The woman who had spent 6 months photographing other people's messes was now standing in the middle of her own disaster, surrounded by the debris of her own poor decision-making. Frank called out from his porch, "Some people never learn to brake properly," which prompted quiet laughter from several other neighbors who had gathered to watch the departure. The perfect irony of the situation wasn't lost on anyone who had witnessed Paula's campaign against my trash bins. She had spent months claiming that my property placement created safety hazards and demonstrated poor judgment, while consistently demonstrating her own inability to operate a vehicle safely around stationary objects. Her destruction of her own mailbox proved definitively that the problem had never been my trash bin placement or anyone else's supposed violations. The problem had always been Paula's driving skills and her tendency to prioritize drama creation over basic safety considerations. Mrs. Rodriguez summed it up perfectly when she commented, "Maybe now she'll understand why we were all so tired of her weekly crash performances." As Paula stood amid the wreckage of her own mailbox, Gary Monroe approached with a clipboard and measuring tape, mimicking Paula's own property inspection techniques from months earlier. "Looks like we'll need to document this violation of community standards," he said with barely contained amusement. "Improper mailbox placement appears to have created a safety hazard." His parody of Paula's own enforcement style was gentle but pointed, demonstrating how ridiculous her previous campaigns had been, while highlighting her hypocrisy in creating the exact same type of property damage she had falsely accused me of causing. Paula's humiliation was complete when she realized she would have to pay a community fine for destroying her own mailbox, under the same standards she had tried to enforce against others. The cleanup process provided one final opportunity for the community to demonstrate the kind of supportive behavior that Paula had never understood or appreciated. Despite everything she had done over the past 6 months, several neighbors offered to help clean up the mailbox debris and ensure that her departure could proceed safely. Mrs. Thompson brought a push broom for the scattered mail, while Mr. Johnson offered tools to move the damaged mailbox post out of the driveway. Even I approached with a garbage bag, extending the same courtesy I would offer any neighbor facing an unexpected problem. Paula's response was a mixture of grudging acceptance and continued defensiveness, as she muttered about unforeseen circumstances and equipment malfunction, rather than acknowledging her own responsibility for the collision. The final moment of Paula's Meadowbrook Estates experience was captured perfectly on Frank's security camera system. Her SUV limping away from the curb with a damaged bumper, trailing sparks from a loose license plate, while she drove at exactly the posted speed limit for the first time in 6 months. Frank and I watched from his porch as Paula's gray SUV disappeared around the corner, carrying away the most disruptive and destructive force our neighborhood had experienced in recent memory. The silence that followed was peaceful and profound, like the calm after a storm that had finally passed. "Think she learned anything from all this?" Frank asked as we watched the last traces of Paula's presence disappear from Maple Street. "Probably not," I replied, "but at least she learned to hit the brakes, eventually." 6 months later, Meadowbrook Estates had transformed into exactly the kind of community that most of us had hoped to find when we moved here. The weekly community appreciation events had evolved into a regular calendar of activities that brought neighbors together around shared interests and collaborative projects. Gary Monroe had been re-elected as HOA president with unanimous support, and the new community standards emphasized positive recognition over punitive enforcement. Frank had been appointed as the official Neighborhood Watch coordinator, a position that suited his observational skills and dry sense of humor perfectly, Most importantly, the culture of fear and arbitrary enforcement that Paula had created was replaced by an atmosphere of mutual respect and genuine community support that made everyone feel welcome and valued. My role in the neighborhood had evolved from Paula's target to something like an unofficial community coordinator, helping new residents get settled and organizing events that celebrated what was working well rather than focusing on what needed to be fixed. The irony wasn't lost on me that Paula's campaign of harassment had ultimately resulted in my becoming exactly the kind of positive community leader she'd always claimed to be, but never actually was. Sometimes the best way to make someone hit the brakes is to let them see exactly where their reckless behavior leads. Paula finally learned to slow down after destroying her own property in front of the entire neighborhood. And me? I learned that patience, documentation, and community building are always more powerful than retaliation when dealing with bullies who mistake cruelty for leadership.
You've just experienced another crazy moment with QA Stories. Subscribe now and dive into even more chaos, laughs, and jaw-dropping tales.